Hello and welcome to The Price of Time, the show where we explore the defining moments that made people who they are today and the impact of those moments over time. Here's your host, Luke Tatum. Hello again and welcome back to The Price of Time. My name is Luke Tatum. Today we are joined by Julia Pearce. Julia is a speaker, trainer, advocate, and the author of a book called The Boy Who Became More Than We Could Imagine. Julia, welcome to the show.
So great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for agreeing to come on the show. I'm just excited to get into all this. Now, I don't know your story. I know just the most vaguest idea of what we're going to get into today, but I don't really know, the ins and outs. And of course, that's on purpose. I want to get into that live with you and have a genuine kind of exploration of that here on the show. So if you would just kind of tell us, we're going to hone in on a particular moment, as we always do on the show. So what is your defining moment that we're going to explore today, just in brief terms?
So that one moment for me was actually more than 30 years ago when our son, who was approaching his second birthday, started having seizures. We ended up in the hospital. The doctors then deemed it a catastrophic illness. So that was my one moment when our son started with his major illness.
So you mentioned that's been quite some time ago. Now, the thing I would normally ask next would be, what was life like before that? I know that's kind of quite a ways ago now, but if you could just tell me, was there any indication that something was wrong? Was there, it was a total surprise, or did you notice some kind of precursor? Just walk me through kind of what things were like before that.
So that's the beautiful thing, is I love that question because I have this gift, this thing of actually remembering everything. My husband doesn't always enjoy that because I do remember everything. But before that, we had this really joyful life. And I was the mom who crawled on the carpet, rubbed out the jeans and just wore things out. So he was a typical little human. He had no indicators of an illness suddenly appearing before us. And so when that illness came, it was a complete surprise to us, his pediatrician, to everyone around us. We had no idea that something was coming. He was born without a disability, without any indicators of a medical major thing coming upon us. And I say thing because it was this big, mysterious happening that happened before he turned 2 years old.
And so 2 years old, were y'all at home at the time? Is that more or less the setting?
So I was actually on my first day of a new job. My husband was home with our son, and he was just playing next to my husband in that drawer full of miscellaneous things, tossing things out and about, making a mess, having fun, running around our home at the time. And he went into a massive seizure at our home. So that was the only indicator. Life was grand, marvelous, ridiculous, and a massive seizure happened. Then paramedics were called, and the adventure, sure, let's call it an adventure, then happened at the time.
Okay. And so, so you got a call from your husband then? Is that what happened? Just if you don't mind kind of giving me some more of those details with your perfect memory, right? You don't have to get into anything you don't want to get into, of course, but I'm just curious kind of what that was like, because obviously, one time I was at work and my wife called and like my son had gotten into a bunch of fire ants. And so he had, potentially hundreds of fire ant bites all over him. And I was like, okay, I'm leaving. See y'all later. And so, and of course that was terrible because I worked over an hour away from home and Dallas rush hour traffic, that kind of thing. But, I can only imagine as a parent myself, just going, okay, what do we do? That kind of stuff. So, floor is yours. I'll stop asking the question and let you answer.
Great. So actually what happened next is the seizures happened so unexpectedly. My husband caught our son as he was going into this massive, what some people call a grand mal seizure, called the paramedics as our son was falling to the ground. The paramedics came, he was checked out. They said, we'll not transport you to the hospital, the children's hospital in our area, if you can get the pediatrician on the phone. They got the pediatrician. My husband transported our son to the doctor's office. He was checked out, and then nothing was found to have caused this seizure, and released to go back home, all while I was at work because things happened so quickly. When a medical event happened, there's sometimes not even time to call the other person, which was me, the mom. Hey, how are you? I didn't even get a chance to even know what was happening until the end of the day when they had returned home from the doctor's office. And I was then picked up from work, this first day of work, looked at the two of them and said, what in the world happened to you? And my husband said, get in the car, you'll never believe it. Of course, I didn't believe it. And we went about our business that evening. Our son did not have another seizure that day. What happened next was, as he woke up the next day, he had lost his ability to walk in a straight line, feed himself, or go about with his usual speech. So he had lost a bunch of skills, which meant I then transported to the hospital after being instructed by the doctor to get there as quickly as possible. The emergency room was waiting for us, and then we ended up in the hospital with our son for more than a week as the catastrophic illness became more intrusive and massive. So it did become this overwhelming event in our lives from that moment on, with no additional indicators of what this could be for quite a long time.
Yeah, so it's still undiagnosed for a period of time, and you're just trying to deal with it day by day, more or less, is what it sounds like, which is kind of all you can do. I mean, as a parent, it's at some points. You mentioned not being able to kind of walk in a straight line, that kind of thing. I mean, I've personally been through some of that. I had a brain injury when I was 15, and you know, I was in a coma and all this stuff. And so then it's like, well, let's practice walking, and kind of starting over at basics. And so I don't remember that super well, partially because it was a brain injury that affected my memory, but it's that's crazy just going through it yourself, let alone trying to walk someone else through it, kind of coach your child through it. And of course I can't speak to what it was like for my mom and dad, but that's also a different story because I was 15. Your 2-year old, 3-year old is not going to necessarily be able to tell you exactly what they need, and they particularly articulate very well exactly kind of what they're feeling or experiencing, and all that. So that's a whole extra layer of challenge. Can I ask you, since you just started a new job, I mean, what was the effect on your job? Because I'm sure that didn't help either, right? You're trying to manage that, and you go into a new job. Sometimes you don't even have like vacation hours for a while. You have to accrue vacation time, stuff like that. And so, I mean, was that a total disaster, or were they okay, or how did that go?
So interestingly, I called the next morning and said, I won't be into work. My son is going to the hospital. I'm taking him there. And they were like, yeah, right. You just didn't like the job. We'll see you later. And they had no idea who I am. It was the first day on a job. I guess that happens on jobs. You just don't show up again and you make up a reason. So it turned out I did go back to that job weeks and weeks and weeks later. And years later, the person that I had called said, I totally thought you were unreliable, making up excuses. And then I got to know you, and turned out that you were actually in the hospital with your child who was in the beginning of this illness, this catastrophic illness. And that's the term that the doctors had given this illness because it did take all of his 2 years of development. It made it so he was unable to use any of his skills. So the job was totally forgotten in my realm. It did not matter for me. He needed 24-hour care. My husband did go to work every day. We did need to buy the milk and pay the bills. So that was the quandary of there is no balancing act in the midst of all that. And this was that many decades ago where there was no text of, hey, this is what the doctors are saying. And there is no, can you just pick up the phone in the midst of your work? So
Yeah, so this is mid 90s, right? I mean, I guess 30 years ago, we're talking mid 90s. So maybe a pager, but not necessarily an unlimited text plan and, this always, always, always connected, thing that that people have now. So yeah, you're right. I'm glad you pointed that out.
not, it didn't exist back then. So this was the beginning of it. And it was a mystery of what was happening with our son and what happened to him at that time.
So how long you were mentioning it took a couple of years, is that correct, to figure out what was going on? Or did I misunderstand?
So when he was in the hospital, we were there for 9 days. When they discharged us, it was after they had controlled seizures with massive amounts of medication. He also was given a diagnosis, so that wobbly walking down the hall, they gave him a diagnosis of ataxia with this illness. So the illness was never found out. They never knew what had happened, but they can't discharge people without giving it a name. So they gave it the discharge name of post-infectious encephalopathy, which is a big word that means they think there was an infection somewhere and it affected the brain. So that's the world of the medical world. And it was fine. Years later, they changed it to static encephalopathy, which means there's a constant something happening to the brain. It's a great code. It gives doctors what they need. His world, our son's world, continued to be really affected by that original illness. He did start walking again in the hospital after doctors did not think he would start walking again. They said that around his crib. And he looked at them, this almost 2-year-old, looked at them and said, I wonder if you know who I am. All with eyes. He had lost his expressive language, got up the next day, pulled himself up out of the crib. I hollered at the nurse and said, so what do we do? They got an IV pole. He started walking, then running in that really wobbly, ataxic movement. And he began. They put a helmet on him. When they released us, the two things that they said were, we think everything will be back within 6 months and get a helmet. So that was the instruction. We got the helmet. It did not come back in 6 months. Medical people are very kind and they do try to understand what is happening. So he began again. That's what happened when we came home. He did continue from there, getting into therapies and learning, and became a really tenacious, resilient, just fabulous human who didn't care what had happened. He started to become again because that's what his essence told him to do. I'm gonna. Do you want to come or are you going to wait there? Because I'm going forward. So that's what we started with. 2 years old, he kept the essence of this incredible human that he was as a little teeny tiny boy. That stayed among all of the other things.
Gotcha. And so how did you have to adapt? I mean, how long, I guess, was this going on? How long were you in and out of all these appointments and therapies and all these things? And how did, your family unit like kind of incorporate that into what you were not planning to have, with all these things, right? I mean, how do you insert appointment after appointment after appointment and all these extra layers of things like a helmet and stuff? I mean, since I had an injury, to my head some years ago, like we joked about me wearing a helmet, but I didn't actually have to wear one, right? It was just a warning of, hey, if you get a blow to the head of like any severity whatsoever, even if you think it's not a big deal, you probably need to go to the ER right away. And thankfully that didn't happen too many times, but it's just, there's so many things, and I know, on some level personally, there's so many things as you're kind of navigating like unknowns, right? I had a brain injury. They don't know what a brain injury is. They don't know how that works. They tell you, well, you might have this, you might have that, and we don't really know. So just look out for those things. And they can't tell you like exactly what to expect. And so I suspect it's a sort of a similar experience here where you're like, well, I think we need to do this. We're going to try this, but we don't really know, right? And so just if you would speak to me a little about that, and trying to incorporate that into your life and adapt it.
So what we found is when our son, so Dallin is his name, when Dallin led us, and when we would follow his energy and what he needed to do next. So when the therapies were happening, so occupational or physical or speech language pathology, so speech therapy were happening, when we would follow his energy and how he could incorporate that into life, that's what we would do. And when somebody said, hey, think about this or go to this testing next, because we were curious for many, many years about, was this a random happening? Was it an illness that just spontaneously came to him and caused so much upheaval? Or was there something else? But when we were able to follow his lead with his energy, with his timing, then we found joyful amount of timing, and not always success when somebody else thought it was. So success is this word that we say they've reached benchmarks or they've reached this goal on a piece of paper or they have. And we were looking at one person. It didn't matter if this growth pattern or this timeline of, well, they should be doing this. And we said, and Dallin is going to do this because that's what he's telling us. So for years, when he came home from the hospital, we did therapy every week, 3 times a week. And we did doctor appointments and we saw specialists and we did many, many things. And then one day we were leaving an appointment, and this is when he was a young teenager. So a decade later, we left an appointment and he signed. So he used sign language as one of his forms of communication. And he signed finished, which is both hands flipping. And he said that to me, and I said, yeah, we're done. You're right. He had a deal. He would do one thing and he would get chips out of the vending machine. They were the worst, stinkiest, messiest chips. He loved them. They were a mess. And so we had the chips and he had his drink and we were like done. And he stopped and he said, finished. And I said, you're done. And he said, I'm finished. We took a break for a year. We canceled every appointment. We stopped and he regrouped. I think that was one of the greatest lessons for both of us. He was heard, acknowledged. He led his life in all of his power and with knowing that he would be heard, and it changed our course. So we became, and he became more himself, which is what teenagers are supposed to do, apparently. Follow the nerve. They're supposed to become themselves. And he did alongside all of his illnesses and pretty complex multiple disabilities, and yet he led it. So that's what we began to learn with him. And he taught us very exquisitely. Are y'all paying attention? Can you see what I'm doing here? And it was really important for us to do that with him. So, in a roundabout way, that's what we did. As he patiently was like, I'm going to tell you again. I'm going to tell you. Through many ways of speaking and doing that. That's his. He had many modes. He had many ways of communicating. That was one of them.
You know, I don't remember if I told you this in our kind of pre-show call or not, but my son, he's 13 as of this recording, and he's autistic, and so that's been a, let me just say, a journey in like discovering how to really pay attention to someone, right? Because there's language, delay, language issues, different things there, and he knows what he wants to tell you. It's just you have to figure out how to hear it, and to to pick up on his signals for different things. And I'm really glad that you said what you said about, kind of following Dallin's lead, and kind of paying attention to what he's saying, because yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, we homeschool and stuff. And so Han, which is my son, uh, Han kind of, it's not that he's choosing every little thing, but you kind of have to know, like, okay, maybe this is not where we are. Maybe we need to come at this from a different angle. Maybe we need to focus on a different skill before we lead into this one. It's just, at the end of the day, if the pupil is not on track, then it's not their fault, right? It's like we need to figure out what's the appropriate next step for them, for him, for whoever it is. And it's just been very, very eye-opening, because I think the natural human tendency is to say, well, this makes sense to me. Why doesn't it make sense to you? And so I really, I can tell that you're, a wonderful parent, right? Because you're keying in on your son's needs, and that's to me the only way, right? So I guess as far as time frame, Julia, like how long has this been going on? Like when did you decide to write the book? Like what is kind of the time frame from onset to today? I know it's been a long time now at this point, decades, but what's that look like in maybe a broader scope?
So, what happened during that next piece of time is when he was a mid teenager. We called him his golden years. There was this really important time. So, when he found his way of, hey, are you listening? Oh, I'll tell you again to make sure you're going to be able to be with me. He had another space of medical happenings that we don't, again, know what happened, but it became a degenerative illness. And his interior and exterior muscles began to atrophy. And it turned into another space of time for about 7 years that we were watching and saying, I think there's something more. And he was reducing his activities. He was pulling away from preferred, going from downhill skiing to standing up to sitting down. So it's adapted skiing. Like you see Paralympians when they're skiing and they're in their bi-ski. And he would use an adapted bi-ski. And then he went from mountain climbing to going up 6 inches. So scaling a mountain to going up 6 inches. And he would have less energy to going boating, which was his favorite thing on the lake. So he would go from boating to sitting at the shore. So we noticed these things and began to get curious. And we, again, didn't find a reason for it. And sometimes it doesn't matter. So we stopped looking and just became with it. And sometimes the being with something is where you have to be really still and say, I don't like it. He didn't like it, but he adapted much quicker and more, again, joyfully and effectively than we did. I was the one rampaging down the hallway silently because he was also affected very quickly with how the energy we brought into his space, which, by the way, the home was his, right? We shared it, but it was his space. And so the energy that came became this: how do we go through this next transition, this next phase of life, this whatever it is? The degenerative illness then went into all of his internal muscles, so he wasn't able to walk as far, but he also couldn't breathe very well any longer. It did end up being end of life with him. And life still happened, and he predicted how he wanted his day, and we said, you betcha. You tell us, and we'll do it. He still did not have spoken language, but he did have many ways to communicate. And if we could pay attention, like you said about your son as well, if we could pay attention, then we did. And if not, then he would just give us another way. So it did turn out that it did end his life, this secondary illness. And what happened with that was the next massive change in our world. I say that I'm in my third act now. The first act was before our son. The second act was this really joyful middle part. And now I'm in this third act going, this is the strangest time. How is the realm even here still? How did the sun continue? How did that rainbow come over the mountain again? And yet here we are. So a few years after he had passed away, and we were living in this bizarro space, it was like Wonka Vision tunnel time. I hadn't listened to music for this period of time because music is what gave us the pulse and the energy with him. He would hear music, and it's how he bounced and came in the car and went to the mountain to climb and went on the lake. It's how we found our rhythm in and out of our spaces. And I stopped listening to music. So when he had passed away, all music stopped for me until one day, and I turned on the music again, and it was horribly beautiful, if that can be a case. And then the stories came back with the songs that he loved to jam to and to bounce to and to turn up in the car so the windows shook. And if you've never experienced being in the car until your windows are like pulsing, it's super fun. And you get looks from the cars around you, and it might be because they want to try it. So I did that again. And then I wrote a little experience at a time. And that's where this book started to become again. And that's the beginning of it.
Was it more, I mean, at first, then was it more you're kind of writing for yourself just to sort of get those things, off your chest and on paper, and you didn't maybe intend for it to become a book? Or was it, I think this needs to be a book, and you were just doing it piecemeal?
So in the beginning, the stories were so drumming in me. I would have the song play, and those stories would come, and I would write it down on a snippet or a receipt or on my hand. And it was for me to have it be out. And then I told somebody about it, and they said, oh, you are in trouble. You have to do this now. And I said, there's not a chance anyone else is going to hear this, including my husband, because he'll walk away laughing, going, that was an awesome story. What are you going to do with it? Which is what he did. He was like, oh, yeah. And then there was that time. And then there was this time. I had no intention of sharing it forward from there until.
Until what? So what changed your mind?
I presented at a conference 3 years after our son had died And people went, oh dear, oh, my friend, you do have to continue this. And then I shared it with an editor, and he just walked away going, oh, you have to finish now. There is no chance that this isn't going to be done. And I said, no way. And then I finished the book and shared it with that editor. And he said, well, there you go. I had no intention. The book wrote itself.
Huh. So a lot of external pressure then. I mean, you were writing it anyway, is what I'm hearing. You were writing the stories anyway. You were getting them out, on paper anyway. You felt, some need on some level to do that. But everyone who was touched by the story said, you got to keep doing it. And so, over a long enough period of time, I guess it's here we are, right? The rest is history, one of those kind of things. And so when did the book come out?
So the book came out last June, so June of 2023. I had to look at the year to make sure I'm in the right year. 2023, and it was a bit heart-wrenching for me. Not everyone is kind when a book comes out, and this one really talks about our son's experiences. They are titled, each chapter is titled with a song, and they are the songs that drummed and strummed and like kept my foot tapping, but they are the songs that kept his foot tapping. So it was this moment of, oh dear, what are people going to say about him? People can say whatever they'd like to about me, and I'll have a conversation. He is no longer here to be able to say, you want to dance? Come dance. Come to me. Come meet me. He is not here for people to do that. So you have to decide. I had to decide if that was going to happen. And apparently I did, because the book is in space and time for people to decide on their own what that means for them now, because children do continue to have life happen. This book also is about the tenacity and the joy and the ridiculous and the and wow, isn't that? Whatever the word is that people have told me, it is more than down. That's what people have said after they have read this book.
And so you've gotten some good feedback in the I guess almost 1 year as of this recording. I'm not sure exactly when the episode will release, but as of having this conversation, it's been almost 1 year. And so you've gotten some good feedback. You've been doing speaking and some of these other things, part of the intro, right? You're a speaker and all that. So I know you had that speaking engagement before the book was out, but then you've been continuing to do that and continuing to, let's say, tour around and kind of tell these stories. Is that what you're doing? Telling the stories from the book or something else?
So it's both. And intriguingly, the first time I spoke was while our son was in the hospital, and the doctors came to me and said, can you share what it's like to have a son with this level of illness to other physicians, students, residents, and nursing faculty? And I said, no. I don't know we didn't know if he was going to survive when he was in the hospital. So I didn't want to be away from his side. And I didn't leave for those days when he was in the hospital. And then somebody who was with me in the hospital said, they have just asked you to do something that you may want to consider again. So I did. So that has been more than 30 years of sharing what we learned, what he has come through, but also he is the most resilient. And I use that present tense. Even though he has passed away, his examples and way that he came through life has shown more people than I even know, because they still reach out and say, okay, so when Dallin was going through this, how do you think he did that? And I'm like, wow, let's talk about that. What do you think that was? And I don't know most some of these people, but they knew him. So it's part of his personal experience that I came through with him, but it's personal experiences that he showed other people that I don't even know, that are still coming back to me about his resilience, his essence, his tenacity, his ridiculous nature of finding something so awesome that people still say, okay, and now? And now what? Like, all
Yeah.
right. I didn't give that to him. That's who he became. That's who he became.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's the title of the book, right? And so becoming is, it sounds like, and of course I haven't read it, and I know I need to now that we are having this conversation, right? I definitely need to read it, and I want the viewers and listeners, to read it too. But is there particular a particular thing that you mean by becoming? In the context of the title of the book, it's just, is that is I don't know. I mean, is it just over the course of his life? Is it something that you're concluding after looking back? Just tell me about that, if you would. If the question even makes sense, I don't know if I'm making sense. But what is becoming? What is becoming in the context here?
Yeah. So I really appreciate that question, because the title was very purposefully chosen. When he was that 2 year old and the doctors said, we don't think he'll ever. Those statements of ever, always, never, or those definitive statements are curious to me. And it was curious that day because he had been there for a period of time, a few days, and they had already decided he would never. And then he did. So he became this incredibly just audacious, powerful being with a lot of things happening in his life that some people chose to define him by. Perhaps it's because he didn't speak with verbal language. And so others sometimes chose to say, so he doesn't have spoken language, therefore he can't choose for himself, which was curious to me because he could. Some would, and this is for Dallin, some people would say, we can't imagine that he'll ever be able to. And then we have a list of things that people would say. Sometimes it was in the medical world, although he had a really insightful group of medical professionals directly around him. If he chose not to be around somebody in his medical world, he would leave an appointment and be done mid sentence sometimes. And I would leave with him saying, I think we're going to find somebody different. He's done with this setting. And the doctors would say, but, and he's chosen somebody different, apparently. So the title about the boy who became more than we could imagine tells about his choices, determination, autonomy, the way he lived his world. The day that he stopped me in the parking lot and said, finished. I'm finished with everything we're doing right now. Can you see that? Mom, hey, 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 are you with me? He used to pull my head close to his. And like we would pause physically until I would pause everything in my world. I wasn't thinking about the next. We got to get to here. I got to do this. There's this to do. I've got laundry. I've got to do this. Hey, Mom, are you with me? Come on now. What you doing? What you doing? Come on. Okay. Oh, now you're here. Come on, Mom. Now you're here. And so that title, I had to be reminded to imagine the grand greatness of this person who had decided, probably from the time he was a tiny guy, y'all should just hold on tight. Get my coattails. I'm going. And an illness changed things, and not being able to speak made us get really creative. So we did. He had 7 communication systems that included a device or 2. That's what the title became, more than we could imagine, encompasses. And perhaps it includes us as well, because are we doing more than we can imagine? I don't know yet. That's a wee tiny tot.
Something I appreciate about what you said is this kind of maybe attitude is the right word, but attitude of like, challenge accepted, right? Whenever people are saying, can't do this, can't do that, won't be able to do this, won't be able to do that. And it's like, oh, well, that's what you think, kind of an attitude. And, that's really cool. Right. And there's so much of what is out there that we just impose limits on ourselves. I mean, just everyone, right? Everyone does this. There is a story, and of course I'm going to butcher the details here, but of someone who ran a marathon, and I'm sure you could find this just by searching online for more of the details. But there's a marathon runner that just kept running. Normally there's like a period of rest after a certain number of hours of running, and nobody bothered to tell this guy. He was some sheep farmer in New Zealand or something, and he came in for this competition, and they didn't tell him that you're supposed to take a break after the first 12 hours or 16 hours. He just kept going, and so he completely destroyed previous records for this race because he just kept going the whole time. He didn't think that he needed to stop, and so without that self-limiting belief, he was able to just keep going. And so, it kind of changed the game for a lot of these other competitors. And, that can apply to so many different things. I just think it's a very human response, to say, well, that's what you think. That's how it's been, but it's not necessarily how it's going to be for me, And so that's a very, very cool thing. I just wanted to kind of dwell on for a second. Now, is there a particular story that you find that just always resonates with people? People are always giving you feedback on, or is it just kind of all over throughout the book, different parts of it, or is, and I don't want to spoil what's in the book. I don't want to get people to feel like, oh, they've already read it, so they don't need to get a copy. I want people to get a copy. But, is there something that just is obviously a standout that's always coming up?
I think with the book, there are pieces within it that people, when I hear back from them, they find they don't have to have the same experience with their child, their grandchild, their friend to find commonality with it. In fact, the ones that I hear back about are people who don't have children with disabilities. So Dallin had complex, unknown happenings in his life, and he found joy all along the way. And what I'm hearing from readers is, I can see that when my son was in the competition, the science fair, the race, that it was so similar to when you talk about when Dallin was running in his race, which he loved to run. He was so fast, and then life changed. And the commonalities between experiences are there. And that's what I'm hearing from folks is, oh my gosh, this feels so the same. Because it is a story about life. It is a story of unknowns and how do we keep going and listening to the people who are here with us in this moment right now. And I think that's what Dallin taught us was, hey, right here. Are you right now? Do you see me running so fast? Hey, do you see me slowing? Can you be here right now? And that I have my favorite parts because I could tell you 1,000 pages of favorite parts. But I also love that being held in his hands and saying, Mom, are you here? Right here. And I ponder that and I sit with that now of, am I right here? Am I with the person right now? I can't be with him, but did he put his hands on my head for a reason to be right here? So when I'm speaking with you and I'm speaking with my friend, am I right here? The lists have stopped for me because he taught me how to do that. And that's what people are also telling me. That's what it is. And that's what I tell people when they come up to me and said, okay, so when Dallin did this and this, what am I going to do now? I share that. Imagine him looking deeply into your eyes. What would he tell you? Okay. Oh, I'm supposed to be here. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, what a incredible take on being present and being focused on what you're supposed to be focused on, and not letting your mind wander on to the next task. And because we've all been in scenarios like that where you're at lunch with somebody, but their mind is on everything except the conversation at the table, right? Or any situation like that. It's especially, we're talking about the time gap from the mid 90s to today again, right? It's like smartphones and all the other things and the notification pings and the fact that I have to mute my phone before I do an episode and stuff so it doesn't distract me and I don't think, oh, who's that? And lose my train of thought and lose my ability to be present and in the conversation with you. That's it's I mean, that's a mindfulness exercise that you can't get just from meditating, right? It's not it's not all internal. That's a concrete, physical reality that you experienced. And so to be able to communicate that and let that kind of inform your day to day is just that's a really powerful story, and how can people find the book, Julie? I don't want to, keep going forever. I want to let people, find out how to get the book and check out what you're doing and, all of your other things. So, what are the websites and links and things that people should check out after our conversation today?
So, one of the best ways to find me and the book is my website. That's juliapearce.net. That's PEARCE. It's also available on Amazon. And I am also on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So, those are good ways. Those are all linked from my website. I do love speaking about what he taught and also his journey. He had so many spaces and places. I can go into the depths of those, but that is the way to find the book and to reach out. Thank you so much for letting me speak that.
Oh, wonderful. No, thank you for coming on the show and going into all this. I mean, it's just I've been very into this conversation. I've it's it's a little bit of a heart-wrenching, story, but it's also really, I think, the way I perceived it is it's a positive story, in some sense. And so this has been a wonderful conversation. I do hope people will, go to the links. They'll all be in the description below the video. And now, is there anything else, Julie, that I didn't ask you that you were kind of hoping to get into? I mean, we don't have to cut off the episode right now. You know what I mean? So is there anything that you wanted to get to that we didn't quite make it into that you'd just like to talk about here as we are wrapping up?
The one thing I do love to share is that alongside of all of our experiences with Dallin and all of the things after he has passed away, is the resilience and the joy can come together, and we don't have to wait for the joy. We don't have to wait for after the hard things and the complexities to be done. They're actually never done. They didn't stop for us after he passed away. They even became a little more so, because my word, how we love to have him in our realm. I so prefer that universe. And yet I also love seeking and creating with his experiences and mine. So that is something to keep in spaces when we can, because life is gnarly. Life is complex, and we can do both. We can hold both with tenderness and a bit of kindness to ourselves and those around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I appreciate you so much. I'll go ahead and wrap up the episode here. Be sure to check out the links in the description box below, and there'll be a link to another episode of The Price of Time after this one. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And thanks, Julia. Have a good day. Thank you so much for listening to The Price of Time, hosted by Luke Tatum. Subscribe to us for more episodes. Check the description box below to learn more about our guest. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend.